Hello and welcome to this free patches video with the steady state fit Impulse Dynamics, a 6 HP module that injects life and musicality into your patches. Here's what's to come. This video is sponsored by Steady State Fit. In this video, I'll be exploring free patches, literally just free patches, as it's part of my shorter demo series where we distill something down into a trio of ideas and patches. The Impulse Dynamics takes triggers or external signals and generates pulses and decay envelopes that you can width and decay time modulate, while also dynamically processing the pulse or envelope or an external signal. And by dynamically process or by dynamics, I mean level or amplitude changes. Think of it as a velocity generator or controller. It can make your trigger patterns responsive, dynamic and exciting, and inject the basic idea of velocity and level changes on a per note or per step manner, and you can also use it for some interesting audio wave shaping too. Running down the panel features, we have our trigger input. This will trigger the generation of the onboard pulse and envelope, and also create a sampled level change. For the pulse and the envelope, we have a width control, manual on the slider, with a width CV input and a width CV attenuator. That width changes the pulse width, so you can think PWM here or gate length changes, and it changes the decay time on the envelope too. And we also have a range switch to adjust the ranges that this is working within. The level section controls the dynamic output, and we have manual level control, level CV in and a CV attenuator. This VCA and dynamic section can process the onboard pulse, envelope, or an external signal, and that's selected on this switch, and that outputs at the dynamic output. We also have a step output, which is the stepped change from any level changes here. They're triggered either automatically via an external in or via the trigger input. And while we have all these features here, you can also use this as a digital VCA with zero crossing technology to sync up different modulation or audio sources. There's a lot to explore with the Impulse Dynamics, but here's the free patches that we'll explore on screen and in the description below for you to skip around. Without further ado, let's dive in. So let's add some groove to these hi-hats, and we'll also use this technique to add some kind of funk to my synth lines. And just to zoom out a bit here, the entity drums are my backing beat. Let's mute that for now. And my sound source here is a noise source into the stereo dipole, which is 4 bandpass filters in this case, coming up into my channel, and I'm level modulating on my mixer's channel here. I'm taking the envelope output from the Impulse Dynamics to modulate these filters slightly, but it's actually the main output, the dynamic output in this case, that's modulating the level. If I remove my modulation here, I'm sending in a trigger, which triggers the internal envelope. I've set the dynamics here to be the envelope, and then it's the level, which of course adjusts the level of the envelope. The yellow trace is the output that's modulating, green trace is the pulse, and the width, which is the decay of this envelope, or the width of the pulse output, is going to be modulated by this blue trace unipolar random from the ultra random next to it. Adding in some of that CV. Instantly adds this groove and kind of interesting feel just by varying and modulating decay time. Removing that for now, if I use a bipolar random source, which is the red cable and red trace here, onto the level, so we'll start a little bit lower and then modulate up and down from this point. There we have our dynamics, our loud and quiet, our velocity, our hard and soft, in terms of the level of these sounds. Combining the level changes, which you can see on the yellow trace, and of course hear it modulating our hi-hat sound, If we combine that with some width modulation, we can have some highly dynamic and interesting sounds here from a really basic noise hi-hat. Patching that against my other drums. It's adding a lot of groove to that beat. Now, muting the drums again. Now, instead of this noise hi-hat, let's come out of the steady state gate, which has a supersaw oscillator at its input, and we'll modulate this filter directly rather than the channel's level. So this dynamic gate out now modulates the frequency of the filter on the steady state gate. Removing modulation. You can hear very simple arpeggio on my oscillator, modulated filter. Again, if I just bring in some width, some decay time changes. Or just some level changes. It adds a lot of interest and movement to the synth line. And of course you don't have to modulate level and width there with random signals. It could be LFOs, it could be set repeating sequences, anything you like. So here we're using the impulse dynamics as a stereo wave shaper. My input is this green trace, it's a sine wave from an oscillating filter. That's coming in as the trigger input, and I'm taking the pulse output, blue cables, blue trace, and the envelope output, yellow cables and yellow trace, into two different filters that have been animated differently and patched into a stereo channel on my mixer. Let's first listen to the left-hand side, which is the pulse through the steady state gate. So this is panned hard left, and as I move the width, we can see this sine wave is being converted to a square. And if we modulate that with an LFO, which is this red trace moving up and down on the scope, you can hear classic PWM, pulse width modulation. Now closing this down on this filter, I'll open my stereo dipole on the hard right side of the mix. That actually has the envelope on that side, with no modulation. It's less of an obvious effect, but when we modulate it, you can see this kind of almost pushing and pulling of an exponential saw-like wave. Both filters open fully. Let's start my sequence again. We'll occasionally get pitch changes on my oscillating filter. You'll see that change on the scope, on this sine wave. And as I close down each filter, there's a different envelope to each filter, really animating this stereo waveform. So in this patch we're sampling one modulation source to trigger level changes on another modulation source. My input is the green trace and green cables. It's a bipolar looping envelope. I'm triggering changes in level, and the level is modulated by this sine wave, blue cables and blue trace. And the output there is the yellow trace that's been sampled every time this triggers, or rather its level change is being sampled. If I pull out my triggering signal, and what you're listening for here is the output modulating 4 band passes for this rich vocal-like sound, and also the level of that changing over time. And those swells are varying in level because the external signal can also trigger the sample and hold every time it crosses and goes back under 0 volts. And you can see that on the yellow trace deviating from that green input. It's sometimes near enough full, it's sometimes lower in level, so less filter modulation, less volume, on those formant vocal-like swells. However, if I trigger this regularly, we're sampling our blue modulator, the sine wave. The output of that is the red trace. You can see a sampled stair-stepped version, and that's been used to pan some signals around in the mix here. And we're not sampling the external input, we're sampling the other modulator, changing the level. So it's interesting that on each new sample we still have a varying signal underneath, as opposed to a completely stepped signal. If you've got this far in the video, go drop a hard sync in the comments. Let me know how you're enjoying these free patches series videos, where we literally just have free patches for shorter demos. Head over to patreon.com/DivKid to support the work that I do. Hit like and subscribe, that's all helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.